And someone made a good analogy for a 24/7 news channel. It's like on a moving train, and someone's taken off the engine driver doesn't have the brake, and you don't even have the emergency chain. So you just go on the train, and you've got to take a choice. Are you going to jump off?
Nowhere.
Yeah, hurtling to. Are you going to suddenly jump off and risk taking the jump? Today you've got diverse sources available. Are you as an individual willing to spend the time, energy and resources to ensure that you get accurate information? Go out there and find or subscribe to sites that will do that. You see, Indians by and large, this is, unfortunate thing to say, we want news for free. We don't want to subscribe. The New York Times today earns more from its subscription than it earns from the paper it sells on the streets of New York. Yeah. Will that ever happen in this country? I'm not sure. Indians, the moment you have a paywall, don't want to pay. Now, if you pay peanuts, you'll get monkeys. I remember the first time computers came into office, there was a pen down strike at the Times of India because the union thought that jobs would be lost. So I've seen that world. I've had my moments of sort of trauma. I had a sedition case filed against me in 2021 for a tweet that I put out. Yes, there was wrongful reporting, but it was in a live situation. It was a mistake. It wasn't seditious. There's no other country I'd want to do journalism other than India, because India mein kuch bhi ho sakta hai. That's the way I love to see this land. This land, can throw up the most unlikely heroes in the most unlikely of circumstances. And may that long continue.
Welcome. Today on Quizzitok, it's a pleasure to have with us someone who shaped Indian journalism for decades, an author, a cricket enthusiast, and an advocate for truth and ethics in media. Rajdeep Sardesai.
Thank you very much, Babu, if I may call you that.
Please.
For joining me, for allowing me to join you on the show, because I have to tell the audience that Siddhartha Basu brought me to Delhi for the second time in my life. The first was 1978 when I came for the Republic Day parade. And the second was when I came to Delhi in December of 1984 for an iconic TV program that he hosted called Quiz Time. I came from St. Xavier's College, but it's 40 years later, exactly 40 years later, December of 2024, when we are recording this, that I see the same figure and you're looking much the same. And there are people even today. I was at a wedding in Amritsar. A general comes up to me and says, "Aren't you the same person who once came on Quiz Time?" 40 years later, after I've done all the television that I have done, people, or some of them, still recall Quiz Time. So it was an iconic show, and you really were a trendsetter. I say that with, great sort of affection for what you've achieved. So thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Rajdeep. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. And this is the second time I get to quiz you. We've also quizzed students from all over the country on Newswiz, which you hosted for 4 years with terrific flair and enthusiasm and gusto, I believe. And yes, it's been 40 years since quiz time. And I remember that when you first came as a student from St. Xavier's.
Yeah.
And that was terrific. And that was, your first outing on television pretty much?
Yeah, it was pretty much my first outing on television. The second time I ever came to Delhi. So it was very exciting, to be in a Delhi winter. It was also a very difficult time. Remember October 84 when the riots took place. So there was that backdrop of the riots, Indira Gandhi's assassination. It must have been a tough time. When I look back on it, perhaps when you're from college and you're coming to Delhi, you're very excited. We came by train. I have an experience that we had a little old monk rum tucked away somewhere in our train compartment, which was confiscated by the railway collector, saying you can't drink on the train. But me and a friend of mine, William Rego, came from St. Xavier's College. And the interesting thing was, among the competitors was Raghuram Rajan, who's now, of course, former RBI governor, and Jayant Sinha, former minister. They were representing IIT Delhi. So it was fascinating to, meet people from across India. We stayed, I think, 4 to a room. So you didn't give us any luxury, but it was just great to be part of, as I said, that was that iconic phase when Indian television had these programs that became huge hits. There was Hum Log and Nukkad, Ramayan, a phase in the late 80s. Prannoy Roy came with The World This Week. I think that was Indian television sort of emerging to the wider, the content creators really expressing themselves to a
That was the first blooming, as it were, because in 84, towards the end of 84, is when Doordarshan opened up to independent producers. And there was only one channel in the country, which a lot of people watching would be surprised to learn. We have more than 1,000. And then, of course, you have innumerable OTT channels and social media platforms. But at that time, Doordarshan was the only show in town, effectively. It was a national network. And there were only 2 slots, Rajdeep, which were open to independent producers. And we were on at Sunday, 9 p.m. was quiz time, if you recall. And incidentally, I wasn't producing. I was just roped in pretty much at the last moment as a host. And based on a pilot that was shot in Kabani Auditorium, I was the hotel. I was, in a uniform. So colleagues who you may know, I.P. Bajpai and Sajay Kak, they gave a call and say, are you free for 10 minutes? And I said, for what? They said, come and introduce this pilot. And I said, because they'd seen me being an MC at hotel shows. Briefly, I was in a hotel, cultural attaché to the Taj Group. And at that pilot, right, which they were doing in Kamani, there were lots of people who you may know. Pawan Verma was there. Wow. Kanti Bajpai was one of the mock contestants. Anita Rosa was there. And who was the scorekeeper, do you know?
My wife, Sagarika. Yeah, she keeps telling me that. I don't recall her. She wasn't the scorekeeper when the final event came.
No,
Kavita, right?
Kavita Agarwal.
See, I remember the name. You see, that's the charm of that show. If 40 years later you can remember the scorekeeper, of course you can remember the host. There must have been something special. I mean, there are 4 quiz masters who I can sort of say have defined in their own way the sort of historiography of quizzing. I was very fortunate in the 1970s as a school kid to go to the Bonvita quiz contest, which was amazing. With Amin Sayani was doing it.
And it began with his elder brother, Amin Sayani, and then Amin Sayani
took it over
thereafter.
And in this small little studio in Mumbai, for me, that was one of the moments of my life to be part of a winning team of the Bonvita quiz contest. And they were tough quizzers, but I had a sort of someone senior to me in school, Jalaj Malhotra, who knew everything about everything. So he just took over that quiz. But Amin Sayani was, again, a huge name already on radio. Then there is Siddhartha Basu, who takes it over to television as we move from radio to TV.
1985 is when it started getting telecast.
And we used to all sort of be hooked onto it, appointment viewing. It was really special. And I remember going to the college canteen and telling particularly the women in the college, please watch me tonight on TV at 9 p.m. So it was my moment of sort of showcasing myself to them. And then there was, of course, Derek O'Brien, who did the Bonvita quiz.
About 92, 93 is when that begins.
On TV.
That's right.
And there's, you are the 3 guys who, in a way, shaped quizzing in this country.
As it happened, and for me it was happenstance, and it was interesting those days. But Rajdeep, I want to tell viewers who may already know that he's been at the forefront of Indian news, bringing stories that matter to millions of viewers. He's also a passionate reporter, analyst, and storyteller, and has authored a number of books, which we're going to talk about. So Rajdeep, we're going to kick off by taking off from your latest book, 2024, the election that surprised India, which has been making waves with its revelations about the India of today, our media, politics, and society. We'll explore the lessons it holds for India's future and its hope for tomorrow. Alongside, we'll also talk about your journey as a journalist, your formative years as a learner, your cricketing and quizzing days, and your insights on staying sharp in this age of information overload. Rajdeep, let's start with the book. It's been described as an unflinching look at the state of Indian democracy. What inspired you to write it?
Babu, these things happen in life. In 2014, I left CNN IBN, a channel that I had set up, a network that I had set up. It was a pretty tough experience. It was pretty traumatic, to be very honest, to be wrenched away from a channel that you'd built as a startup. But circumstances forced me in a way to take that decision. And I was really at a low point. And at that low point, I discovered that maybe I could write a book, because I thought this 2014 election, which was 10 years ago, was a defining election. The BJP had won a majority for the first time. Narendra Modi was the prime minister. I had tracked Mr. Modi for decades. And the book just happened over those 3 months. I think all the angst I had, I put into the book. As it turned out, the book became a bestseller, something that I didn't really foresee. But, people seemed to like it. And then the publisher said, let's do one more, which was 2019. Again, it was quite an, defining election. The BJP crossing 300 for the first time. And then 2024 happens. And, I think pushed by Sagrika and pushed by the publishers, they said, if you've done 2, why not do a trilogy? So I said, okay, we'll do a trilogy. And I've been pleasantly surprised with the reaction. I think this is perhaps the most hard-hitting of the 3 books. And maybe that, in a way, reflects how my journey, the journey of the last 10 years. And, a book writing gives you an opportunity to step back and look at the larger world around you, unlike a TV show. TV show now increasingly is breaking news, a lot of noise. It's here and now. Today's news is tomorrow's history. And therefore, I think maybe the next generation will, if they wish, want to look back at this decade. They've got 3 books to sort of explore the last 15 years. It's just my belief that I think we need to document and in some way sort of put on paper all that's been happening around us so that we have a firm recollection of these times 20, 25 years from now. I may not be around, but hopefully someone out there will be reading the book, maybe as reference material, maybe just to enjoy a good story. I'm a storyteller. That at the heart of it over these years, now 36 years last month, as a professional journalist, I've been a storyteller. People sort of typecast you in all kinds of ways today, but my self-image has always been I'm happiest when I can tell a story, when I can meet new people and tell that story. So this book is a reflection of that.
And it's factual storytelling. Because some people think storytelling is making up stuff. And a lot of people make up stuff, or they're given stuff to make up and then sort of pitch it to people. There's factual storytelling. And also, apart from being a studio pundit, you've done hot-footed across the nation. You've been a reporter too. And really, the book, in a sense, reflects a lot of that finding out on the ground.
I hope so. I mean, I'm an observer. And as a reporter, I've been very privileged to have this ringside view of Indian politics and society over, 30 odd years. And it's been dramatic when I look at the change. When I joined in 1988, this profession, it was a typewriter.
Yes.
And, the corrections would be made on the paper. Then you went back, typed it all over again. It was a very different world. I remember the first time computers came into office, there was a pen down strike at the Times of India because the union thought that jobs would be lost. So I've seen that world, from typewriter, computers coming in for the first time to now everything on your mobile. Yeah. Any one of us could be a citizen journalist today. And I think that's the strength and some way also the weakness, because in real time, you could spread a lot of fake news. We're a post-truth society, lots of fake narratives. Someone will WhatsApp you a photograph. Is it genuine or not? You have no time to even fact check it anymore. The pause button no longer exists in our lives. So we just hurtle from one news to the other. A book gives you the opportunity, as I said, to step back and give the overall picture and maybe say things that you don't say on TV. The media chapter, which has made waves, is largely because I think someone is finally saying a few things which otherwise are kept in the shadows. So,
yeah, that's something that I want to talk about a little later. Overall, what's been the most surprising reaction to the book so far?
The surprising reaction actually came the other day from a minister in the Modi government, a senior minister who's a very good election manager. Rings me up. I had 2 missed calls from him on FaceTime audio. So he obviously was very conscious, keep it on FaceTime audio, and tells me, yaar, lajawab kitab aapne likhi hai. Bilkul sahi, I'm very impressed. And I've been telling all my friends in the party, ki kitab zarur padho. I said, so I said, great, could you say the same thing maybe as a tweet or put it on social media? He said, marvaoge kya? So I said, but you've been so generous with your praise. He said, no, I'm telling you this, but I genuinely mean it. And I was touched by that because, if someone who's because the general impression, oh, Rajdeep must be writing it so much, it must be anti-government, it's a realistic assessment, good, bad, and ugly, of what goes on around us. And I think it's important that a writer puts it out there. You see, you can't hold back as a writer. You've got to put it out there. So that was very that was very reassuring. And the other one, N. Ram, the former editor of The Hindu,
That's right.
and one of our senior most journalists, meets me at this function where Bob Woodward, famous for All the President's Men and Watergate, which became an iconic investigation in the 1970s, he's addressing us at a function in Mumbai a couple of weeks ago. And N. Ram comes to me and says, "Look, I've just begun reading your book. It's better than Woodward." And I said, "Sir, that's now," and he sent it to me in
Quite a compliment.
and he put some of it on Twitter as well. I think he started with the media chapter, which is what I told him, but to start with. But that's a bit overwhelming. But look, forget that. Woodward was one of the reasons I joined journalism was I was this young kid in the 1970s who was obsessed with quizzing and news. And Woodward was an iconic figure for me. When I watched All the President's Men with Redford and Dustin Hoffman, it was very special. But and I still remember 1976, the US presidential elections, running to USIS, Gerald Ford versus Jimmy Carter. I wanted Carter to win. Don't ask me why. Maybe I was always a Democrat at heart. So, peanut farmer, and I used to get the Time. I started subscribing to the Time magazine as an 11-year-old. My parents were not, very keen that they spent that much on the magazine, but they allowed me to do it. That was the one luxury I had. And when I was 12, 1977, Indira Gandhi is defeated. And I go running, I remember, to my mom and to everyone in school, Indira Gandhi's been defeated, Indira Gandhi's been defeated. So the news ka kida probably started in those ages.
Very early.
That kida, yeah.
That's right.
And the quizzing kida.
And that bit you at that time. Fantastic. You've seen a number of elections. You've reported on a number of them, along with a number of national events, crises, and been all over the world as well. How have you seen the elections change, particularly these 3 elections you reported on broad highlights? Would you like to sum it up?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's changed is elections increasingly are now far, it's now as much a science of managing an election as much as it is about creating a mahal. It's not just about, you've got to do the micro level planning of a kind that was unimaginable, say, 20, 30 years ago. And with every election, the level of planning, the strategic inputs are getting even more and more perfected, right down to the booth level. I mean, you've got all these data agencies collecting intelligence. You've got pollsters doing very, very massive surveys for political parties.
Exit polls awfully wrong.
They will get, and sometimes they, perhaps if the political parties are their clients, they will get it wrong. Yeah. But sometimes they get it spot on. But the level of competitiveness in elections is far greater, I think, than 30 years ago.
And this now require massive resources.
And that's the other point. The huge resources required. In elections 30, 40 years ago, there was a great festivity around the election time. You had buntings, posters, hoardings, walls plastered with posters. The entire city seemed to be excited with elections. Now you see less of that. It's less of a spectacle in that sense, but actually more money goes into elections. The money goes into, some say, buying votes on a scale perhaps unimaginable 30, 40 years ago. And just the resources that you need to put together this election machine. I mean, it's now an election machine that you need. And that's the big change that I've seen. I liken it, given my passion for cricket, saying that now if you play cricket, you've got to do it the Virat Kohli way. Super fit. Similarly, to win an election or to compete in an election, you have to be super fit and very resourceful. And that is one of the big changes that I've seen in elections in recent times.
Your last chapter in the book is about the media, which is something which is one of the most candid accounts we've had so far. You've been an insider for the longest time. You also see what kind of partisanship there is. Some people try to be objective and out of that. Do you want to sum up your take on the role that the media played in this election?
Look, I think the media is clearly a player now in some form or the other at election time, which is used and exploited particularly by the party in power. One of my sort of broader points I make through the book is that we no longer have a level playing field in elections. Then, whether it's money power, whether it's media power, whether it's misuse of agencies, all of this comes together in some form or the other to give the incumbent a huge advantage. And the media has become a willing accomplice almost at times in this entire process. What is even more troubling is, unlike in the past, there's a sense that if you don't, there's a sense that if you tell truth to power, you could get into trouble. So the hard questioning, the interrogation, the questioning that we used to see in the past when it came to governments no longer exists. So I give the backstory as to why that is happening. Why is it that we've got an NDTV, for example, eventually subject to a hostile takeover? Why is it that the editor of NewsClick, a small media website, eventually gets arrested for 6 months under an anti-terror act? Why is it that young journalists who perhaps are brave enough to tell stories suddenly find themselves having FIRs filed against them? And because all of that is happening, because the mainstream media is towing the line, you've got the rise of digital media and these, as I call them, these digital revolutionaries who are all doing guerrilla tactics to somewhere bring out the other side. So all of this, it's the media is being managed by governments, particularly at the center, but also in states. So you've got a managed media on one side, and you've got those who are trying to break free. It's an interesting time in a sense for the media, and I've tried to reflect that.
That's happening in many places in the world, as a matter of fact. It can't have been easy for you, Rajdeep.
Well, it hasn't been. I mean, I've had my moments of sort of trauma. I had a sedition case filed against me in 2021, and I've still tried to wrap my head around why should I have a sedition case for a tweet that I put out. Yes, there was wrongful reporting, but it was in a live situation. It was a mistake. It wasn't seditious. And then to have sedition and identical FIRs filed against you in 8 different states, eventually getting bail from the Supreme Court, was a pretty harrowing experience. I mean, but it's not about me. I'm just a small fry. I mean, when I thought, I was feeling sorry for myself until I met this young climate activist, Disha Ravi. And she actually spent a week in jail.
The girl in Bangalore.
The Delhi police went to Bangalore, picked her up because they said she was part of a toolkit that was anti-India or anti-national during the farmer agitation.
Because she sort of reposted what Greta Thunberg had done.
She reposted what Greta Thunberg had done, and you go to Bangalore, pick her up and put her in a prison cell. And then when I met her, young little girl, very innocent, and I just felt that, why am I feeling sorry for myself? I've got to feel sorry for Disha Ravi. I mean, she's the one who's really had to go through far greater trauma than I have. I have the protection of being part of a large channel, a large network. She doesn't even have that. And there are many others like that. I mean, why should a young journalist of NewsClick have his mobile phone and laptop seized with the police landing in the special cell at his house at 6 a.m. as if he's going to run away somewhere? Paranjoy Gua Thakurta, a senior journalist like that, being subject to interrogation, a 6-pointer in the ICSE, as one of the brightest journalists that I know of. I mean, why should these people be subject to the kind of interrogation where it's almost as if it's a crime to do investigative journalism? And that to me is something that, these are the stories that need to be told. I mean, I think there's a media book to be done. The kind of response to the last chapter convinces me at some stage, maybe I'll have to retire to do it. Then you can be free of any encumbrances.
But we need voices like yours all the time, and we need many more voices like yours in many languages. Exactly. But I'm just wondering about growing up at this time. We grew up with state-owned media. So we were used with bland kind of material, but we also knew it was not going to be sensationalist, and there were not going to be wild fabrications, which is almost the rule today. But think of the young people growing up in this situation, hearing these screaming matches which pass off as debates, and also this very, how should I put it, a partisan kind of, coverage and reportage, and also hate speech becoming normalized and biases and prejudices coming to the fore. For young people growing up in this scenario, what are they to make of it? Where do they think they're going to give actual objective reportage and coverage?
They've switched off. The young have
I
switched
have.
off.
I have to make a confession. I've stopped watching the news.
But I'll tell you one thing, and I said this at a gathering the other day to much laughter. There are two situations in which you should be watching TV. If there's someone in your house with low blood pressure and you need his blood pressure or her blood pressure to rise, or if there's someone at home who's in coma and you need to revive them. Those are the two situations you should watch TV. I keep telling people that if you want to live longer, don't watch TV news. Because, it's become, as you said, these slanging matches, the shouting, the sort of incendiary rhetoric. It reaches the point where it is a turnoff. I mean, I have two young children, if I could call them young, 28 and 30. You've got young children, slightly older. But, I don't think that generation will relate to this kind of noise. Everything has a time. I think that time of those angry, raucous debates is slowly coming to an end. And if we don't realize it, the new world will take over. Programs like this, quality content will take over. People want quality still. And because you've got limited time, you want to either watch an OTT series, you want to watch a podcast. There's no appointment viewing. It's not the 1980s where I would, on a Sunday, as I said, switch and watch Quiz Time. That era is over. So you're going to have to do something new, different. And somewhere I think I myself find almost being in a cage at times with the noisemakers and trying to break free. Not easy.
Rajdeep, you were talking about viewers getting blood pressure and think what it must be like for people like you who are within to cope with it. That stress must take a toll.
No, it's not just what happens on TV. There's this toxic world of social media, particularly of Twitter,
Yes.
where anyone can say what they want, often in anonymity, and you have no real right of responding because you're just adding them to the cacophony. So one thing is the noise on TV, and it's amplified by what happens on Twitter. And that makes it even more difficult to deal with. How does one...
Do you develop a thick skin, or do you take it all on balance? You get philosophic and you transcend all that sort of, toxic trolling. What is the approach?
Look, I think at one level, as you get older, you get more philosophical. You say, you remember the good times when it wasn't noise. That's one way to do it. The other way is to listen to Kishore Kumar's music. The other way is like me to watch as much of sport as possible. That's my big stress buster. I watch a sports event and I suddenly feel a sense of great calm. I'm going to see a cricket match at Melbourne for the Boxing Day test, and that's good enough for me. So I think we all need stress busters in our lives. And particularly if you, and don't take yourself so seriously. Too many of us believe that, we are the newsmakers, we are making the news, and therefore we get so involved in it that it starts taking a toll on us and our physical health at times.
I've seen that. So many of your contemporaries and those even younger, literally we've seen people age in front of our eyes.
Here I am, great, look at it.
I've lost it all, and that's just asking people questions.
Whatever little you have is blacker than what I have. I mean, I'm trying to think, Babu, that in '84, when I first met you, did you have, were you fully...
No, I had a reasonable full head of a little bald patch.
Little bald patch, yeah, okay.
That was in the genes, because my father was totally bald, as was my grandfather, so that happens.
Yeah, but you're older than me and you still have more black hair.
Yeah, way older than you.
Yeah, so look, I'm completely grayed, and my kids are telling me, that you got to slow down. So
yeah.
As someone made a good analogy with what a 24/7 news channel. It's like on a moving train, and someone's taken off the engine driver doesn't have the brake, and you don't even have the emergency chain. So you just go on the train, and you've got to take a choice. Are you going to
jump to nowhere?
Yeah, hurting to. Are you going to suddenly jump up and risk taking the jump? I mean, that's the way TV news is. It's crazy, and it can be exciting. Let me be honest. Having said all this,
Adrenaline.
Live television on election day, when you're watching, say, a big guy losing or a David emerging as conquering Goliath. We saw a lot of that in 2024. It's fascinating. I still remember the Haryana elections at 9 a.m. The Congress was already celebrating, distributing mithai. By 11 a.m.
Yeah, were you watching you? That's one of the few things I watched at this point in time, the election sort of results, and we were watching you happening, and then how the seesaw happened. It turned around completely, which is another mystery. Haryana and Maharashtra, what happened there? But this is not a political show, so we
But I'm just saying that element of real life drama on an election night or an election day, counting day, is just fascinating. That's where TV comes into its own, when it can actually reflect real life drama. On a daily basis, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work in the way I wish it could. And therefore, that's why I write books.
terrific listening to you on your book about the elections, but let's pull back a little bit. I want to go back in time to your childhood, to your family, to your personal journey, Rajdeep. You've had a dynamic career, a life in different places, but it's rooted in a deep curiosity, as I understand it, and a passion for learning. Could you tell us about your family and academic and personal experiences, how those have shaped your love for learning, for finding out about things, for knowledge, and leading up to journalism and beyond?
Babu, I'm a South Mumbai or South Bombay townie kid who was, educated or reared up in a very cosmopolitan environment of a old Mumbai. In my class, we had half a dozen Parsis, we had Boris, we had,
Very cosmopolitan.
very cosmopolitan. South Mumbai was almost like a cocoon. We were in a little island of our own in Bombay. And my early memories of school are always of playing a lot of cricket.
Yeah, because your dad was a legend, and what a cricketer he was.
Yeah, but I realized later in life that just because your dad was a cricket legend doesn't mean you have cricket in your genes or blood. I mean, if anyone
Played cricket at the first class level. You were an Oxford Blue, which is quite something.
That's right, but I didn't. I mean, I had this obsession that I wanted to play for India and realized soon enough or late enough that I just didn't have the talent. I say this, and with no prejudice to anyone, an actor's son can become an actor. A businessman's son can certainly take over the family business. A politician's kid's son, daughter, anyone can become a politician. A cricketer or a sports person's son cannot or daughter cannot reach anywhere close to those heights simply because your dad or mom was an Olympic athlete or a cricketer. My dad used to always tell me, I can't go on the pitch and score the runs. You're going to have to do it yourself. So there's no space for real nepotism in sport, which is actually healthy. It's true meritocracy. My dad is the only Goa-born cricketer to play for India. Came to Mumbai at the age of 17, never having seen a cricket ground in his life, a proper cricket ground. From Portuguese-ruled Goa, was playing for India at 21. I mean, it boggles my mind when I think of that. And here was I with all my, getting the best equipment, the best coaching, in the best of schools. Not good enough. My dad said I didn't have the fire in the belly. He said, you need the fire in the belly, the passion. And I still he passed away several years ago, but sometimes he comes back to me and that's a memory that stays with me, that you have to have the passion to do, passion, talent, and hard work. If you don't have all three, you just can't make it. Only 11 guys play for India in a country of 1.4 billion people. So it is ridiculously competitive, and therefore I'm almost awestruck. And my fanboy moments come when I see cricketers and actually musicians, because I have a terrible voice, and I want to sing. I hear people sing, even amateur singers at a party, and I say, "Wow, yeah, why can't I sing like you?"
Well, it's a gift to be.
It's a real gift,
but to enjoy it is another thing altogether. And hey, it's okay to enjoy music without necessarily being a singer.
Yeah.
But tell, your dad was he out a lot? Because being a cricketer, those were not days of professionalism, as it were, because they weren't necessarily paid that much to play, or not at all in many of the cases. Was he not home a lot of the time? And what was the...
Well, it's interesting. One of my early memories of life is 1971. It's my first year in school. I've just joined school, standard class 1 in January. And a month later in February, my dad in the West Indies scores a double century, the first Indian to score an overseas double century. And the matches in the West Indies would be late night, early morning. So I remember an uncle who was staying with us getting up at 6 o'clock, shaking me up. Get up, get up. Your dad has scored a double century. And here I was, this 6-year-old, obviously excited at that moment, and going to school and being literally feted by the school. I was mentioned in the school assembly. It was my second month in school, and the principal mentions me. We have a very special boy in school. I said, hell, there are a couple of guys who are there from school around still remember it. Praful Patel, who's the union minister, was there in school. He was senior to me, and he still remembers that this little kid was suddenly the star of the show. It didn't last very long, but whatever it was.
This was the fabled 71 tour.
Gavaskar opened, and Gavaskar scored 774 runs, and my dad scored 642. But it's the first time India beat the West Indies in the West Indies. And 6 months later, they went to England and for the first time beat England in England. So it was this great year, 71.
Huge year for Indian cricket.
And so the story of West Indies is going to school and being feted. The story of England is the team was taken on this motorcade. I still have a photograph of it somewhere with all these vintage cars. From the airport to the stadium.
In Mumbai, yeah, I remember
and
clearly.
I managed to get onto the car with my dad. And, again, you're this little kid who's sort of being celebrated in a way. I remember when we beat England, it was Ganesh Chaturthi, the biggest day in Mumbai. And my uncle lifting me on the shoulder to Chowpatty, where the immersion of the idol takes place. And, you felt great. It was a 6-year-old feeling as if he owned Mumbai. But so those are very happy memories. He retired by 73, so I didn't really see him play in Test cricket. We actually played matches together for a club in the late 70s. I was 13, so he was, sort of nurturing me into the game. And those are very fine memories. We had a century partnership once. He was almost 50, I was 14. And he scored much faster than me even then, those are the... And my mom was a professor, has...
I was going to ask about her. Yeah.
It was very different. There was the cricket world and there was the academic world. And I think somewhere I fell between the two. So my mom would be driving me with a ruler to do all the sort of exams and tests. And my dad would be taking me to the Maidan to sort of see Mumbai, as I wanted to see it, which was this lovely place. I go back to Mumbai and I go back to the Maidan and I feel as if I'm a sense of liberation, a sense of childhood excitement. Even today, when I go on the Maidan, I watch little kids playing cricket. I just feel a sense of excitement. I think that part of me will never go away. The academic part has long left me. I think my mother was able to drill a sense of academic discipline, which was great. She still teaches. She started teaching in 1974-5 after my father had retired and taught first in a school. And for 40 years, she's been teaching in colleges. She still goes and does 2 papers a day. I went and met her a few weeks ago and she said, please don't disturb me. I said, why? It's only 5 in the evening. She said, no, I'm correcting papers. Now, if you're correcting papers at the age of 80, you've got to have some special discipline and I think
conviction and a passion.
Yeah, I think a bit of that has come in me, the energy and passion and discipline that she brought to teaching. I've tried to bring, I think, to journalism because that's the only way you can do 5 nights a week. You've got to be disciplined about it. But, if you gave me a choice, I'd have loved to have had my dad's cricketing talent. And it was terrible because all these old timers who were his peers would always say, your dad, he was very good. You should have, something not there, yeah. And it was very depressing. I remember I was as a young cricketer, Sachin Tendulkar's brother used to play with me in the same club side. And Sachin came to watch or play a match with us just as, as a 12th man, as a 9-year-old. Honestly, as 9-year-old, he played better than us. And, he was something really special. Again, God's gift. So, lots of happy memories when you said childhood in Mumbai, maybe very privileged and a bit elite. And I think because of cricket and because cricket took me to Maidans and enabled me to explore an entire Mumbai, very different from the social class that I came from. I think it helped me a lot in life. I was then became part of the Maharashtrian middle class in junior college. I went to Wilson College only to play cricket. And I would play night and day, and we won the tournament twice. But all the boys around me were hardcore Maharashtrian boys from Girgaon and areas of middle class Mumbai. And I think it kept my feet on the ground, and it served me well in life. Otherwise, a lot of elite, privileged kids of cosmopolitan South Mumbai can just get rootless after a while. But yeah, those
So
are memories.
what took you from there, from the Medan and Wilson College to Oxford?
Uh Look, I got into a good college. I got a scholarship. I decided, why not, take a couple of years, go to Oxford. I took law, not for any other reason, but I said, got to do something with life. And it was at Oxford that I realized that cricket is over because I was bowled for one against Pakistan in a combined universities match. I got a 60 not out in my first debut match against Derek Underwood, who had played with my father. But yeah, so I did reasonably well, but like water finds its level, I found mine. And I decided to do law, went to Oxford, came back in 88 to Mumbai with the idea of becoming a lawyer. I enrolled in the bar there. I was about to enter a chamber which also had Dhananjay Chandrachud, who later became Chief Justice. But I was in Crawford Bailey, a law firm, for about 3 months. But I was just struggling to come to terms with sort of where I think I was confused. I didn't know what lay ahead. And for family reasons and other reasons, I decided, look, I'm getting no money as an advocate assistant. I wrote a couple of columns from Oxford which went into the Times of India. So Girilal Jain and Dilip Sardesai, who were then editors at the Times of India, said, why don't you join and become an assistant editor at the princely salary of 800 or 850 rupees? It sounded good. And I thought I'll do it for a year. The year turned out to be 36 years and counting. So
Wow.
and the Times of India had a special quality to it. I was in the room next to the great R.K. Lakshman, the legendary cartoonist.
Of course.
And every morning sitting with R.K. Lakshman was an education in itself. I mean, the guy was a terrific, acute observer and a news hound in a very different way. I mean, he tracked the news even while he was a cartoonist. So he had the most pithy remarks to make at our edit meetings, but very sharp. And so, it was joyful. And the great thing about that era was there was no breaking news, no TV, right?
Yeah.
Only Doordarshan. So we didn't have to worry about that. So you could do long lunches and you get some of the best eating places in and around the Times of India and Victoria Terminus, now Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus. But so it was, I think I was still a little, I was still growing up and coming to terms with the wider world, and Times of India was a nice, happy place to be in.
And you were there for a while.
I was there for six and a half years, from 88 to 94, till I finally landed in the bad old world of Delhi.
And television.
And television, which just happened, Babu. I mean, Prannoy Roy just happened in my life. I still remember going and meeting him and Radhika Roy, and they had an office in GK. They said, we're starting this first half an hour current affairs program. And they were taking a lot of young people. So I said, sure, seems like an exciting new thing to do. And I actually thought again that it wouldn't last for more than a year, 2 years. We'll find something, go back to print. Again, that's lasted 30 years. But it's, we are all beneficiaries, I think, of a revolution that took place in those years. I mean, from the years that you spoke about of just Doordarshan, who would have imagined 400 private 24/7 news channels? So we just got, we were part of this wonderful journey.
Well, that's one thing. 24/7 news channels, I think the pressure of funding to actually cover news has been a challenge because, the numbers don't necessarily validate that. And because of which, I think that a lot of pandering happens, a lot of economic pressures in, I think, sensationalizing things or of playing for certain people who want the news said in a certain way, or a political party, which has also been happening for a long time. In many states too, you've had political parties with channels and doing that. So how has that influenced television news reportage?
No, you're absolutely right. We've had quantity, but the quality has been lost out. But we were fortunate in those early years, there were very few channels.
Yeah.
I mean, in that sense, it gave us far more opportunities to invest in news gathering. There was a business model in a way in place. You either worked for a particular channel, provided content for a channel, and because
So
of-
little news gathering happens now on news channels.
because the business model has broken down, right? So you want to do low cost investment in news gathering. Why will I send a reporter to spend a month in Manipur when I can just discuss Manipur in a TV studio? So
Yeah, gather 8 people to shout at
that's
each
right.
other.
So I think that's the big change, Babu, that's taken place from then and now. But we saw that other world. I remember doing a program for World This Week when the first communist government was voted in Nepal. And my first line, and we used to write to pictures. The first line was, the sun rises in over Everest. So there we are, me and my camera person waiting for the sun to rise over Everest, but it was a cloudy day. So for 24 hours we were waiting, when will the sun rise? It rose the next day, but we waited for 24 hours. Now you wouldn't have that luxury today.
No.
And that's the big difference, I think, between then and now. Today it's what I call the McDonaldization of news.
Yes.
It's become like a hamburger. You eat it, but it doesn't leave really a great feeling after a while. I think in those days we really had a bit of a luxury of a buffet before us, and that I feel privileged to have seen that time. And the other thing, I remember 1996 we did the elections for Doordarshan, and think about it. There's no one else. There's the big elections. They went on for 3 days. This is pre-electronic voting machine, so it wasn't a T20 match.
Yeah.
It was a nice, long, drawn-out test match, and the entire country is watching you. So when people say, how did you succeed in TV? I said, because people had no option. The viewer had no option but to watch me. उसी को देखना है, क्योंकि और कोई है नहीं. And there you are in the Congress headquarters in 96, going on for 3 days, prattling about, and the world watched you. So we were very lucky. And I just wish today's kids could have seen that age as well, because they're very talented. But I guess competition has commodified the medium in a way.
Rajdeep, you've been sometimes referred to as a political quizmaster for your election coverage and nightly news programs. Do you think quizzing and general knowledge play a role in shaping informed individuals?
Hugely, particularly in my profession. One of the things I tell young readers or viewers is, please read about the world around you, especially read newspapers, or whether you read them digitally or in physical form, read a lot of books and widen your general knowledge. That doesn't just include quiz books, but it just includes fine writing from across the world. Because unless you know more about India and the world, how can you really be a good news journalist? So for me, I think quizzing, general knowledge was all part of this curiosity about knowing more about the world. I mean, my mom makes fun of me saying, at 11 you knew every capital of the world. She told this to my son, who was completely disinterested in this, and said, I'm not going to learn about the capitals of the world. But so my mom was trying to make a point that, her son was better than her grandson when it came to quizzing. Didn't make any impact on my son. But I think that curiosity of knowing more about capitals, about just knowing more about the world around us makes a huge difference. So I think quizzing is something that is almost an essential part of being a more rounded person, because it just tells you more about the world around you. I'll give you an interesting example. Boxing Day Test match on the 26th of December every year in Australia. I thought Boxing Day was a year when in the past there used to be boxing matches the day after Christmas. And then the other day I was at a school reunion and a friend of mine told me, no, that's not the story. Boxing Day is when boxes would be given during Queen Victoria's time to all the staff at the palace. All the leftovers of the day before would be distributed in boxes. And that's how it became Boxing Day. How you learn something new every day in life.
That's right. But do you think in the news cycle, which is so demanding, so hectic, non-stop, round the clock, there's time for people to read, to find out? How do people manage it? How do you manage it?
I try and make a point to read a book a month. That's the target I set myself. How I do it, where I find the space, it's time management. One of the challenges of our times is time management. The good guys do it. I mean, Amitabh Bachchan, you know him better than most. You were part of the KBC team. Remarkable. At the age of 80, 82, he's still sort of managing to do films, quizzing, other stuff. I think he just juggles time well. I think time management is key. It's essential to keep time for the things that really matter. And one of those things, I think, if you're a journalist in particular, is reading books or reading the newspaper. Uh, yes, it's maddening and more difficult than it was, but you've got to make the effort. You can't say that, I'm hurtling from one story to another, so I have no time to read. That's not good enough. You have to create the time to read. It just makes you, as I said, a better rounded person, improves your vocabulary, just enables you to digest experiences that are truly wondrous in many ways.
I think, and the other things you mentioned, the keys of curiosity. The other one is questioning things.
Absolutely.
And the bottom line is wanting to get to the truth of the matter, to get to the fact of the matter to the fullest degree possible. I think that's important.
And there, I think one advantage that today's generation has is data.
Yes.
There's so much of data available there. And there are lots of young journalists doing great data-based journalism. A lot of us, I think, were faffers in my journalism. A lot of opinion we expressed. I think today's journalists, to be fair to them, have far more access to data and therefore can build even a stronger argument. So I think you've got to use that as a tool, as a weapon, to only further improve yourself. If you're curious about something, go and find out more data about it. Climate change, for example, which is going to be one of the major challenges of our times. We need to have more data on what is climate change doing to the planet around us. It's all out there. You just have to go out there and have the curiosity to search it.
Yeah, which brings me to this whole challenge of journalism and learning in a digital age, the importance of fact-checking. You mentioned a lot of data, a lot of reports, but a huge deluge of misinformation, post-truth aspects, propaganda, this overload of information and data. How do you actually do it? How are people, ordinary citizens, not just news organizations, supposed to do that in today's day and age?
I think that's a big challenge for all news organizations, small or large, because news is bombarding you from everywhere. Information is, and it's all in real time. I think every large organization needs a separate fact-checking unit. Many of them are doing it. I think you need to invest far more in it. And I think the smaller organizations perhaps can create their own sort of fact-checking models, business model. You create a model wherein you have a vertical that only does fact-checking. There'll be a lot of takers for that today. So, and using AI, using all the digital tools available to you, I think you can do credible fact-checking almost in real time, whether you're part of a mainstream media organization or a much smaller one. Because there is a business model available for a number of people who want fact-checkers now. So there's going to be a growing demand for fact-checkers. It's almost as if you realize that because there's this complete citizen journalism has gone almost out of control. Everyone throws out all kinds of information at you from every corner. You can actually create spaces for fact-checking. I think it's going to be possible. AI will make it easier to do. I always believe AI is going to be a double-edged sword. It's going to be an enabler. But it's also going to sort of restrict maybe some of the creative energies at times. But we need to make the best of AI and use AI partly as a tool to ensure that information can be, misinformation can be sifted out, and you provide hard, accurate information to people. It's going to be a huge space available for the journalists of the future.
This is news organizations and media organizations. What about the ordinary citizen? To be able to fact check, which you said is a greenfield opportunity professionally, people need to have a certain base of knowledge. They need to have the kind of sharp tools to be able to tell fact from fiction, truth from mistruth. What would be your advice to students, teachers, growing population, the youth population that is growing? They have to have enough contextual information to be able to navigate this labyrinth.
The way out really is don't put all your energies in WhatsApp universities. Don't make WhatsApp the very basis for all your information. You've got to be able to want to do your own fact checking. Today, you've got diverse sources available. It's not as if there's a shortage of sources. Are you, as an individual, willing to spend the time, energy, and resources to ensure that you get accurate information? Go out there and find or subscribe to sites that will do that. You see, Indians, by and large, it's this, unfortunate thing to say, we want news for free. We don't want to subscribe. The New York Times today earns more from its subscription than it earns from the paper it sells on the streets of New York.
Yeah.
Will that ever happen in this country? I'm not sure. Indians, the moment you have a paywall, don't want to pay. Now, if you pay peanuts, you'll get monkeys.
Yeah.
It's part of the problem with TV. I mean, for 800 rupees, you are getting 1,000 channels. The economics don't work. So are you willing to invest in good news or in accurate news? Are you willing to put that effort that I want accurate news? Not just enough to say news that confirms my own biases or my own assumptions. That's what we're doing at the moment. Subscribing to sites or spaces that confirm our own prejudices and biases. Can we move away from that and look for spaces where you get quality, credible information that you're willing to pay for? Even $5. $10 a month may make a huge difference. So I think that's the challenge of our times, to convince people to not just consume the news, but become news subscribers in a manner that you're investing in the news. That, I don't know, will happen in India. It's happening in the West. Think about it, Babu. CNN makes a large part of their revenues from subscriptions and a small part from advertising. In India, we make an overwhelming part of our revenues from advertising and a very small part from subscription. And that advertising-based model beyond a point is unsustainable when you have so many news channels or so many networks and digital media. So it's actually about our survival as well as a news industry, that we've got to encourage a subscription-driven model at some stage. Not easy, but we've got to do it.
In our own small way, I and the team, we are trying to do it in a very different way, which is strengthening the general knowledge and foundational knowledge of children to have enough in their heads and know how to find out about things, to then be able to tell what's true, what's not, what's correct, what is not correct, which is one thing, like you started, reading. And reading is one thing that I think is terribly important, and reading widely and well and with discernment.
Absolutely. And one of the things before the show I want to tell viewers is Babu was showing me some of the books that he and his organization put together every year for students from class 1 to 8, giving them well-designed books, informative, with full of general knowledge. And many schools subscribe to them. Now, if that model could also be taken into news, I will give you quality news. Will you subscribe to it? Can we create a model where every morning, let's say, students in every school get the 10 headlines that matter, and they're curated and given to them, which are then disseminated by the school to all the students, hopefully in a class of general knowledge. But what you've done through books could, in today's age, easily be done as a sort of digital input to every school student in every language of the country. The 10 headlines. I mean, I'm thinking of a potential business model out there. How do I give 10 headlines to students that they need to read every day? And can we encourage schools to be part of that process? These are the little ways, the small ways, as you said, where I think we can make a huge difference.
That just reminds me, exposure is vitally important on news and on all sorts of other aspects. And one aspect we haven't discussed with you is you as a quizmaster. We did News Whiz. And the students we had from all over the country, for 4 years we did that in India Today, their level of awareness was gobsmacking. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
What was your experience like watching them and as quizmaster?
First of all, I've got to give a lot of credit to Kalipuri at India Today for deciding to go ahead with NewsWhiz. It was an idea which I think could have even gone even further. Unfortunately, COVID came at the wrong time, but we had 4 wonderful years. Also, all credit to you and your wife, Rosa Basu, who sort of enabled me who taught me the little basics that I needed to learn, and your wonderful team with all the information that they had. So you need a strong production unit to pull off a program like NewsWhiz, but you're bang on. My experience was that here were these young kids full of information and full of knowledge, general knowledge. and from all parts of the country. I think we had a winner one year from Kerala. We had a team from Kashmir that reached the semi-finals.
That one from Jammu.
Yeah, one won it from Jammu.
It was still Jammu and Kashmir.
Yeah, and I
So in
remember-
that sense, you weren't wrong saying Kashmir. It was
Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, Jammu and Kashmir. I remember that. But I remember there was a team from Srinagar as well. Yes, did rather well.
Yeah.
And for them it was a great adventure. I felt so great to see these young kids from Srinagar, full of beans. They've gone through a lot in the last 20, 30 years. It's nice to see kids from Srinagar showing their talents to a wider world. But
Indeed, and they were going through really rough time. And you would recall that the Kerala team who won, that was the year when their whole city had been flooded, which was, waist deep in water, including their schools.
that's right. And then you had Vadodara. I remember one year
Yes.
a team from Vadodara won, and they were apparently virtually taken on a sort of motorcade from the airport, as like heroes to their school. So I think it makes a huge difference if you can use, if all of this can in some way be evangelized, if you can scale it up and make quizzing and general knowledge part of the routine of kids. Just as you have mathematics and you have your geography classes, you should have quizzing classes. I mean, that's how I did it at home, learning from the Bonvita quiz books that used to come out. But maybe the next generation will find new ways using digital to sort of spread the message that quizzing is good for you. Quizzing is not injurious to health. It's actually good for health, unlike smoking, which is injurious to health.
Yeah, it's not just a distraction.
Yeah.
It's vital, not just to find out about things and to stay well aware of the world around us, but also to enrich what you know about this world. One last thing before we wind up. We ask all our guests, what's the buzz? What's next for you? What do you see happening in the country and the world? If you can sum it up in a few quick points.
We are going through a very turbulent era. As I said during the show, that today's news is tomorrow's history, and I hate to predict the future. And I hate to predict the future because I remember doing a program in January of 2020 and predicting that this was going to be a big year, 2020. Guess what happens 1 month later? The world is completely disrupted by COVID. So I hate to predict what will happen, especially in a country like India, where you never know what tomorrow brings. But I think we are entering a very exciting period where you're going to see a lot of disruption, a lot of new factors emerging in our lives. The news buzz, 2025 is not a big election year. There's Delhi and then there's Bihar later this year, unlike 2024. 2024, Babu, had about more than 60 plus democracies or autocracies across the world holding elections. Some were autocratic elections, some were democratic. 65. I mean, it's just mind-boggling when you think of it. A number of incumbents lost, because I think these are tough times for when you're an incumbent. I think we're going to have a relatively more calmer time in 2025. I hope some of the conflicts of the world will finally end, whether in Ukraine or whether in the Middle East. I hope Donald Trump, he's unpredictable as well. So he's going to take over in 2025 January. He's going to make a lot of headlines. And I hope he makes the right headlines for once, because I think the world needs a little bit of calm. We've had a very, very turbulent 4 or 5 years in this country and the world. I'm hoping to see calmer waters. At a personal level, I'm on an extended break, which is why you see me smiling so much. I seem far more relaxed because I don't have to worry about, yaar, kaun se guest ko lana hai raat ko. A lot of my time early morning goes with my guest coordinator. Yaar, ye guest ko kisi bhi tarah le aao. We have to get it, or 2 in the afternoon, I guess, suddenly get a buzz, sir, can you do a record now with the guest? I say, it's 2 in the afternoon, I'm having lunch, sir, kar do 10 minutes. So I'm looking a little bit more relaxed as a result. I don't know how long I can be so relaxed. I guess at some stage I've got to go back on the moving train or the treadmill in some form. But I'd love to explore new things. I think the great challenge or opportunity for the media today, or those in the media or the content business, is that you can use technology to do so much else, which you could never do in the past, and perhaps reach out to new demographics, new audiences. I just mentioned kids and headlines, but you could, find ways in which to create communities among those who are obsessed with sport or those with music. find with AI, with science and technology. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity out there. I'm pretty, at the end of the day, Babu, I believe India is still a country whose true potential is yet to be realized. We're a 50-50 country, and a lot of my book is about darkness and things that are going wrong, which we need to address to become a stronger democracy. But there's also hope. One of my chapters in the book is Democracy Zinda Hai, Stories of Hope. Now, where else but in India would a 26-year-old Dalit mother of two like Sanjana Jatav win an election against this very strong candidate sponsored by the BJP and the chief minister? And she crowdsources her way, gets monies from a few influential people in Bharatpur and becomes an Instagram sensation. India mein kuch bhi ho sakta hai. That's the way I love to see this land. This land, can throw up the most unlikely heroes in the most unlikely of circumstances. And may that long continue. That's why there's no other country I'd want to do journalism other than India, because no 2 days are the same. Think about if I was in Britain, all I'd be reporting, it's a cloudy day, it's summer, the rain's about to come. There's very little that really changes in England. But in India, there's always change. And I think that's what that sense of perpetual motion of change makes this still, for all the troubles and that I've highlighted, still makes it the most exciting place to do journalism.
On that optimistic note, here's to hope. Hope floats. Here's to a more knowledgeable time and a more knowledgeable generation. And here's to calmness.
Absolutely. One of my favorite Hindi film lyricists, he's a genius, is Syed Ludhianvi.
Yes.
And he said, "Oh, subha kabhi to aayegi."
That's right. So with that, we wind up this very engaging chat for me, Rajdeep, and I think for everybody who's been watching and listening. Thanks, Rajdeep, for joining us on this. Your journey, your insights, your stories have been quite inspiring and interesting. We hope this conversation sparks curiosity in people and a love for learning in our listeners. Till next time, ciao.